You go. You don't have to.
Hi, LA Progressive friends and readers. It's Dick and Sharon back again with our good friend, now becoming an increasingly good friend, Bill Blum, who regularly participates on these interviews. He's a former judge, a professor, a frequent writer, an author. Uh, um, and and all that's coming together at a really good time when there's so much going on the legal front, on so much on courts, especially as Trump tries to run roughshod off the Constitution. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing all right. Recovering from the near fatal encounter with the Palisades fire, but we're okay. Our
Yeah,
home survived.
yeah, we're lucky. We have so many friends, both of us. You do, we do. We have so many friends that have lost
I
everything.
know. Lost everything.
He said
Just
flames came within 50 feet of his house,
Oh my
no,
God.
no, no. About 150 yards.
Oh my
150
gosh.
yards. Well, that's
Yeah,
plenty
Mm,
close.
just over one ridge. There are big burn scars up here in the canyon, and one home was lost.
Oh,
terrible.
oh.
Yeah,
Well, there's a lot of terribleness going on in this
sure is.
written addresses birthright citizenship. And I want to begin by talking about the 14th Amendment and how birthright citizenship came to be a guarantee of the Constitution, because until we had the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, that language didn't even exist, did it? So tell us about this 14th Amendment and this particular clause within the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment is pretty chunky. But this citizenship clause, can you talk to us about how it came to be?
Sure. So there was a provision in the Civil Rights Act of 1868 that recognized birthright citizenship, but there was nothing in the Constitution to do that. And at the time, in 1868, post-Civil War, there were still a lot of uh, very progressive radical Republicans in office, and they wanted to protect newly freed slaves, and they wanted to override the disastrous Supreme Court decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford, which held that African Americans, Black Americans, could not be citizens no matter where they were born, no matter where they resided, even in free states. So this language was inserted by the Senate uh, after a joint House Senate commission had worked on this issue. And it's the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment. And it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. They're citizens at birth. So there was a debate on the floor of the Senate as to what was meant by this. And cited as an exception to this basic rule were children of ambassadors, and the proponents of this rule also talked about how the rule incorporated English common law. And in English common law, uh, children who were born to invading soldiers were not considered citizens of that jurisdiction. So there were already built-in exceptions. And then also, as part of the debates, members of Indian tribes who were still members of Indian tribes were not recognized as having birthright U.S. citizenship. That didn't change until 1926. So that's how the clause came to be incorporated in the 14th Amendment. And of course, that was ratified by the states. And that clause has not been reviewed very often by the Supreme Court, but it's been reviewed at least four times, principally in 1898 in a case called Wong Kim Ark, ARK, versus United States. And then in subsequent cases, in passing, it's been noted by the court that all children born in the United States, subject to those exceptions that we previously talked about, are citizens at birth. One of those cases is Plyler versus Doe, which deals with the right of undocumented children to attend public schools. And there are a couple of other ones more recent than that. So that's the prevailing consensus on who is a citizen at birth. And of course, Donald Trump, since he declared his candidacy for president in 2015, has been on a tear against what he calls alien invaders and anchor babies, that is, children of undocumented people who claim U.S. citizenship under the 14th Amendment, and he doesn't want to see that continue. So what he's done is he issued an executive order, signed an executive order, which purports to protect U.S. citizenship, but actually operates in very Orwellian fashion, as I wrote, to deny U.S. citizenship to the children of undocumented aliens. There's some qualification that you can have if one of the parents was here legally, one of the parents is a citizen, but it would deny U.S. citizenship to children of parents who are here legally, but on temporary visas.
Right.
Had his executive order been the law of the land, Kamala Harris would not be a U.S. citizen at birth. She would have to have been naturalized. So this is part of Trump's policy to divide and conquer. And his game plan legally is to get this order before the Supreme Court, because the lower courts are bound by Supreme Court precedent, which is very firm. And we've already seen two district court judges declare and issue preliminary injunctions declaring that the executive order is very likely unconstitutional. The injunctions aren't permanent. They won't be permanent until there's a trial on the merits. That will happen later. But for right now, the executive order is enjoined nationally, so it can't go into effect. Now, Trump's people understand that, and they want to get this before the Supreme Court, and they want to argue, as lawyers do, that the Supreme Court precedents, particularly this Wong Kim Ark case, are distinguishable from today's situation with the undocumented aliens, where both parents are undocumented or just the mother's here and a child is born. And they're going to argue, as I wrote, that the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship never was meant to apply to the children of invaders, right? So that's the key. We talked about that. Children born to military occupiers weren't at common law recognized as citizens of the country that's being occupied. So they want to argue that these undocumented people are invaders and that their children, therefore, are not citizens at birth. And only the Supreme Court can make that kind of interpretation, because the lower courts are bound by these other Supreme Court precedent decisions, which go in the opposite direction. And the vast weight of scholarship also would confer birthright citizenship as a fundamental constitutional right on children born here, with the few exceptions that we talked about. So that's the game plan. That's where it's going. And if you think that this executive order has no chance in the Supreme Court, you need to go back in time and ask yourself whether you thought that Roe v. Wade would survive, whether you thought that the Supreme Court of the United States would ever hold that presidents have immunity from criminal prosecution when they exercise their core constitutional powers. So it's not at all clear that the executive order will be ultimately declared unconstitutional. It might very well be upheld by the Supreme Court, but until we get there, it's not going to take effect. What will happen in its place is this accelerated deportation program that the administration has undertaken, which is nowhere near as vast as they publicized it as being, but it's pretty gruesome nonetheless. And it's part of our long history of both inviting immigration and expelling immigrants. We've been doing this for decades and decades, and we'll continue to do it. We did it under Biden, we did it under Obama, and we're doing it under Trump more brutally, perhaps, than we have recently under other presidents. And it's the actual facts of the Wong case are interesting, and you can see how Trump's lawyers will try to distinguish them. Wong was born in the United States in San Francisco to parents who were domiciled in San Francisco. They didn't have any really legal resident status because we didn't have an immigration law, but they were here, they lived there, but they were subjects of the Chinese emperor. But Wong was born here. So it was very hard to be a Chinese person in the United States in the late 1800s. There was a lot of violence against them. And the parents moved back to China. Wong went to visit them twice. Once he returned in 1890, and they admitted him as a U.S. citizen. At that time, Chinese were going to be excluded, particularly Chinese laborers. But they admitted him because the immigration people said that he was a U.S. citizen. When he went back to China and came back again in 1895, they excluded him and they put him in detention. And that's where the Supreme Court case comes from 1895 to 1898, when it got to the Supreme Court. And it's very interesting how a group of lawyers came to represent him. It was sort of like a Chinese benevolent society, which sort of anticipated the kind of work that the ACLU does, where they pulled their resources and they represented him and they argued his case before the Supreme Court, and he won. And that's how Birthright was formally recognized by the Supreme Court. And of course, it's the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment.
So you mentioned Kamala Harris, and I would say Kamala would be putting together her cabinet as we speak, had Trump and his folks not been able to leverage this issue in particular. This is a big reason that Trump got elected. The Democrats didn't have a very good counter argument, and it won the day. But the thing with Trump is his only real use for immigrants is to marry them if they're from Eastern Europe, or to hire them for his restaurants and then not pay him otherwise. But he did energize people who are really exercised about this. And I wonder what it is with people. I mean, don't they understand that immigrants are harvesting our food, are cooking our food, doing all kinds of manual labors that history has shown Americans aren't willing to do for the low wages they pay. So what's going on with people? I mean, why is this a white nationalist movement to exclude people with brown skin south of the border?
It is. It's definitely racial. It's a white supremacist kind of movement, but it also illustrates the kind of schizophrenic attitude that the United States has towards immigration. Because on the one hand, we need immigrant labor, and we need it today as much as we ever have. And on the other hand, we want to stigmatize them. And I do want people to know that factory raids and the deportation of undocumented people who have committed no crimes other than illegal entry didn't start with Donald Trump. In fact, there's a book called The Deportation Machine, which was published by Princeton University Press a few years ago. And one of the chapters details one of my first big cases that I did with Peter Shea, who just passed away, Mark Rosemount from the ACLU, Antonio Rodriguez. You didn't know that he passed away?
No.
Yeah, in July.
Oh, yeah. He used
No,
to
it was before
come to
that,
my law school, to People's
in
College
March.
and occasionally give talks.
Oh yeah, he was a brilliant lawyer, really good friend. Anyway, this book details a case involving the Sabika shoe factory, and under Jimmy Carter, there were factory raids all across the country. But at this time, activists in LA were trying to forge a movement of labor and immigration, undocumented immigrants, because they shared in common their working class interests. And they were building this labor immigration alliance. And once this factory raid took place, we formed a legal committee And we got a TRO against the deportations that was issued by Judge Matthew Byrne, who was the Pentagon Papers trial judge. And then we did all sorts of deportation hearings where we actually had a tremendous record. But it goes to show, and this is a really interesting book. I'd recommend it to your readers. It goes to show that this sort of behavior goes back decades upon decades. Remember Eisenhower's deportation program in the 1950s, which was called, was that a racist term?
Yes.
Operation Wetback.
Yes, Kelly Lytle Hernandez has written extensively about this. Kelly Lytle Hernandez, and we'll put some links to the book that you talked about,
Yeah, you should.
as well as the book that Kelly Lytle Hernandez has written.
And then in the 1930s, there were mass deportations of immigrant laborers in the United States. So this is an old story. Donald Trump is a demagogue, and he knows how to divide and conquer. That's one thing he does really well.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, he's been campaigning forever. When he came down that golden escalator in 2015 to announce his campaign, the first thing out of his mouth was how he wanted to stop the Mexican rapists who were coming into our country. And of course, there were some good people. He always adds that. And he's been doing this ever since. And this was maybe one of the three top issues that got him reelected last year.
And you could see why. I mean, he's not incentivized to not do this. He's incentivized to do this because he doesn't have to really be concerned about losing any votes. The other thing that we haven't talked about at all is the construction industry. We really never had an issue with private prisons until they started to build detention centers, private detention centers. And now I'm hearing that they're beginning to expand the capacity to detain more people by building more private detention centers. So there's
even scarier than that. He wants to send people to El Salvador.
Right.
And Guantanamo, which so you mentioned Guantanamo in your piece. Do you want to make any comment? Because I understand that today several undocumented people arrived in Guantanamo.
Right. So the U.S. has detention facilities there, and they want to expand them to 30 to accommodate 30,000, I believe. And so that can be done right away.
Yeah, that's a big fat contract. A lot of profit there.
Sending to people to El Salvador, and he's even floating the idea of sending U.S. citizens to El Salvador.
Right.
Now that's another thing. Maybe it's a bridge too far even for our Supreme Court. I would hope that it is, but just the fact that he says it instills such fear in people that the hope is that the opposition will be overwhelmed and so intimidated that they won't be able to fight back.
So part of what's going on here is Americans' history is to treat Central America as banana republics and exploit the people to the extent we can and leave them in poverty. And same with people in Mexico. And they are highly incentivized to try to get into the rich America. And for those who do, it's oftentimes a real boon to their lives. An alternative would be to do something meaningful to build up the economies in Central America and South America. Do you think there's any chance we would do that?
I don't think there's going to be that. I don't think that's going to happen under Trump. He wants to curtail foreign aid, and he of course doesn't believe in climate change. So some of these people are now or will be climate refugees. As parts of the world become less habitable, they're going to want to come to areas of the world that are habitable. And the Trump administration is only going to aggravate those two factors that push people to come to the United States.
That's right. Aggravating them with the United States representing 4% of the world's population, but being a major contributor to the causes of climate change. So these people that will wind up being climate refugees more than likely didn't even have a hand in creating the conditions that created climate change.
That's right. So this is a dire situation. I think that even if he loses on the issue of birthright citizenship, and before he gets to the Supreme Court, he will be losing. He's going to implement this immigration deportation program, which he wants to promote as the biggest in U.S. history. Maybe it will be ultimately, maybe not, but he's going to be relentless in pushing it. And he has Stephen Miller and other people in his administration who are telling him what to do. And he has Elon Musk, who is now running much of our infrastructure and destroying it from within. So people who warned about Donald Trump and urged people to vote for Kamala Harris, I suppose, we're all saying, I told you so, even if she wasn't, our savior. I don't know how the folks who sat it out or actually voted for Trump are thinking. I assume that many of them are going to have buyer's remorse, if not now, then in the near term.
Well, we hope that people read the LA Progressive, people share the LA Progressive, people subscribe, people who are listening on YouTube or on Spotify or are watching on the LA Progressive. We have share buttons on all of the social media accounts, including Blue Sky. We need you to share this content. And the time that we're in right now, it's more crucial than ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll add that you're right. President Trump is not going to do anything to build up the economies or to fight climate change or do anything to stem immigration. And honestly, I don't know which president would. But there's still things that we as individuals can do. You mentioned the ACLU, there's Cheerleader, there's other immigrant rights organizations that are right now organizing for people in the courts and in the streets to at least express the idea that we don't buy this shit, that this is inhuman to be doing these kind of things, taking little kids down to Guantanamo and putting them in tents. I mean, what worse could we do other than, move all the people out of Gaza? I mean, we're just doing one inhuman thing after another, and it makes you shake your head.
Yeah, I think there's going to be an opposition. There are already demonstrations against the deportation program. And I think in the coming weeks, you're going to see sentiment certainly turn against Elon Musk. One of his key henchmen already resigned. This
Really?
25-year-old. Yeah, he resigned today after the Wall Street Journal, of all publications, exposed his participation on some kind of racist platform. So he left. And there are, in addition to these injunctions that have been issued against the birthright, there are challenges to what Musk is doing, getting people's personal data. The government has agreed to postpone that pending a hearing on a case in which another injunction is being sought. So I think that the fight back is going to start. We certainly have a long way to go, but I think we're going to get there. And we don't really have any choice but to fight back, because we face an opposition that's just relentless.
Right.
And it's in the best interest of all of us. The thing is, this divide and conquer strategy tends to make people think, well, that's happening to them over there, I'm okay. But how are you going to pay for your groceries? If you have a house that's under construction, or you need something repaired, or anybody that is in where there's an intersection between the immigrant community and the people who were born here, we all rely on each other. These people came because we welcome them, because we need them, and they make major contributions to our lives.
That is absolutely true. And I think that if Trump follows through, in particular on these tariffs with Mexico and Canada, although I don't think he will, he backed down very, very quickly when both countries said they're going to impose reciprocal tariffs. and they offered him deals, which really weren't deals. They offered to do what they've already committed to doing. But if he were to do that, that would have a big inflationary impact. And I think we're going to see inflation and unemployment tick up anyway. He's going to be laying off federal workers. All these undocumented workers aren't showing up for their jobs. And what I'm reading is that produce is rotting in the fields, and that's going to have an inflationary impact. So I think that Trump's popularity is going to sink. It sank last time. I think it'll sink faster this time. What replaces Trump remains to be seen. And everybody has to understand that we all have agency. We all have some power. We're not impotent in the face of this onslaught.
That's right. Well, Bill Blum, once again, it's been a pleasure talking to you. You always enlighten and educate, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks. It's always great to be here.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.